Imagine if each morning when you wake up, you're smiling and looking forward to your day, knowing you are happy even while you're dealing with grief and loss. The Grief and Happiness podcasts inspires, comforts, and supports you with each new episode. I'm Emily Zero-Threat, welcoming you to explore with me your life of endless possibilities. Aloha. I'm so happy you're here with us today. I have a just fascinating guest that you're going to love listening to and getting to know. Her name's Melissa Hull, and she's written a book called Lessons from Neverland that it is so rich. There's so much in there and so much to think about and contemplate about. And I think you would really, really enjoy reading the book. So welcome, Melissa. Can you tell us a little bit about you?
Oh, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I am Melissa Hull. I am an author, an international speaker, and a voice of bravery when it comes to diving into a healing journey. I know you've read my book, so you're a little familiar with some of the backstory, but for the listener, I would say that my life has been a series of challenges from childhood forward that have been emotionally painful experiences. Struggled with a relationship with my father. My mother was very ill. She was diagnosed with cancer when I was 10 years old and she had to leave our home to seek the medical care that she needed. And so from childhood forward, there's been this emotional kind of place of unsafety that I became very familiar with, moving through that into adulthood. I met and married my husband at the time, and we had a beautiful family. And he was I think from the outside, what people saw was probably that stereotypical kind of living the American dream. He was a very successful dentist here in the state of Arizona. And appearances were that we were happy and that life was good. But the truth was that we struggled. We struggled quite a lot. And I would say at the height of our marital struggles, we lost our 4-year-old son, Drew, to an accidental drowning. The circumstances around that were my husband was away on business. I was home with my 2 children, Drew, who was 4.5, and Devin, who was 3. Devin was an asthmatic child. And so I had been up doing these breathing treatments, trying to avoid going to the hospital with him. And my son, Drew, was one of those adventurous little spirits. And he was up at the crack of dawn, and I was exhausted. And I set him down in front of his favorite program, which was Thomas the Tank Engine. And I gave him some crayons and some paper and some breakfast. And I said, hey, I'll be right back. And I went to go check on Devin, who was, still wheezing and really struggling to breathe. So I laid down beside him and I was just kind of comforting him. And then I realized I must have fallen asleep because I woke up, and I don't know how to explain it, but I instantly knew that there was something wrong. It was like this panic that was instantaneous. And I immediately started to look for Drew, and I couldn't find him. He wasn't in the house. And it was probably about 20 minutes after really searching, panicked, just looking behind curtains and in cupboards, under beds and closets, that I noticed that our back door was slightly open. And I thought, okay, he's outside. Good. He'll be outside. I'll find him there. And unfortunately, what I found was his footprint leading to a very large irrigation canal. We live in a very agricultural part of the state of Arizona. And when I saw the footprints and I knew where it was leading, I ran as fast as I could. And when I got to the edge of this very large irrigation canal, I could see the splash where he had fallen in. And from that point, things became this unimaginable blur. But it was within, I want to say 7 hours of that the news came that they had located his body and that he had in fact drowned that morning. And this unimaginable, unwanted kind of life began. And I felt completely responsible for it. I felt ashamed. I felt that I had failed. As moms, we know it's our job to raise our children, to protect our children. And when these circumstances occur that aren't planned for, it is so difficult to not internalize it and make it all your fault. And for years, that's exactly what I did. I made it all my fault. I overlooked the very real, I guess, the realities, which was I was an exhausted mom. I was doing my best. I was doing it alone. My husband was gone. I didn't have help. And I was struggling. I was struggling in many ways, but that particular morning, I was just physically exhausted and didn't make a conscious decision to fall asleep, but inadvertently did. And the unintended consequence of that is that my beautiful son, who had this adventurous spirit, had taken himself on a journey that morning that unfortunately separated him from us. His transition wasn't something that I wanted or desired, but it was what I was being asked to confront at that particular time. And I struggled, for sure. I struggled. But eventually, what became very apparent to me is that I had to find some courage in order to get through this experience. I chose to spend a lot of time kind of imagining Drew as Peter Pan. And the book's title is definitely derived from a year of writing Drew a letter every single day, asking questions like, what is it like in Neverland? What does it feel like to jump from cloud to cloud and to, sit with the stars? And it was a kindness that it was a mercy, I think, that I adopted to help myself slowly come to the place where I could emotionally process and allow for the truth, which was that my son had passed and that he wasn't Peter Pan. And I had to really search for how will my relationship with him, how will it continue? I had these big questions, how it felt easier to imagine him as Peter Pan because it felt more tangible. It felt like he was still alive in that respect. And it took me some time to really reconnect with his spirit and to feel that my relationship with him was something that could continue and that it wasn't over. And it was something that I needed. I desperately wanted to feel his presence and to feel that there was a way for him to continue to be a part of my journey in life. And so I looked for ways to create that. I started to talk about water safety. I went to classrooms and started to share what I had learned about water safety and how, boys under the age of 5 are the most at risk when it comes to accidental drowning, and to educate parents about, water hazards. And I didn't have a swimming pool in my backyard, and I didn't necessarily think of this irrigation canal as an immediate threat. But I quickly understood that there were things that I could do now with this knowledge and information about how to keep other children safer and give parents more information. And that felt like that pathway of bringing Drew and his life and his legacy forward, which provided me a purpose. And so from that point forward, I started sharing my story in many different ways. I wrote a book, Lessons from Neverland. I started writing a weekly blog. that I publish at melissahall.com and on medium.com. And I just look for ways to continue to talk about grief and bereavement from a lens of how to be not just okay, but how to be more than okay. How can you reclaim things that were accessible before? And that was my quest. Is I wanted to thrive again. I wanted to be vibrant again. I wanted to feel that I had a purpose and a reason for life to be wonderful. I was never kind of satisfied with this idea that life would only be shades of gray. I didn't want that life. That wasn't the life that felt like it allowed for me to continue on in a way where I could use this experience to become better. And that was my goal. And maybe that's unique to me, and maybe it isn't, but I really, truly have spent the last 20, almost 4 years since the day that the accident happened with this belief and this determination to be better than okay, to be at my best, to be vibrant and happy, and to not settle for anything that didn't feel like it aligned me with those possibilities.
It's such an amazing story to be able to learn so much from the experiences that you had. I love how you wrote him letters. That's one thing I always suggest for people to do, is to write their loved ones. There's a different kind of communication you get to do that way. And I think that's really a wonderful thing to do. You mentioned about the courage to embark on a healing journey. And I love that perspective, that a lot of times people think that there's nothing they can do when they're just in the throes of grief, or whether they've lost a child or any kind of loss that they're dealing with. They don't feel like they can do anything about it. But you certainly have, with all you've been through, had such an amazing healing journey. How do you talk to people about embarking on a healing journey?
I ask people what they want for themselves, which seems at times for some people a very hard question to answer, because they are very much still inside of the experience of the loss. And I totally understand that. I truly do. But I do also know through my experience that there is a moment that we all, if we're being honest, we all arrive at. And that is, what is life? What is my life going to be from here on? Am I going to, for me, the question was, am I going to punish myself for falling asleep that morning and give in to this narrative that I blew it, that I somehow forfeited my card, to be a good mother? I still had my son Devin, and I didn't like feeling like he got this sad version of me from here on out. I didn't think that was something that I wanted to settle for. And I promise you, it was a struggle. Like, there was this real temptation to give in to the overwhelming weight of this grief that felt like it was literally suffocating me. Like, it was so present, and it felt like it existed right in the middle of my chest, making it hard to breathe, just hard to do something that is so automatic. We don't think about breathing, but for me, every breath felt like effort. Every moment felt heavy. And I realized that it was because I had this unanswered question that only I could answer. And that was, did I really, honestly, truly believe that I was a bad mother? That somehow I willingly put my child in an unsafe situation that somehow took away this idea that I was a good mother. And it took me time because I had to lean into the pain. I couldn't get away from it. There was no finding answers by the diversions of whatever. Sometimes it was, internet shopping. Other times it was just staying in bed all day and not wanting to think about anything. I couldn't do that. I knew I couldn't do that. I had to figure this out, and I had to really get clear on what I believed about myself and what I believed about that moment. Did I do anything with this idea that he wouldn't be okay? That it was like every other morning, many, many mornings. Because when I say Drew got up early, I mean, this child was up before the sun. We had a rule that he couldn't get out of bed until the sun was up in the sky because he just was so ready to live each and every day. Sometimes his day started at 2 and 3 in the morning. Mm-hmm. And I definitely wasn't ready to get up and start, living the day right in those moments. So we had this rule that Drew had to stay in bed until the sun came up. And on this particular morning, it was a little before 5 a.m. And when I really started to look at the facts and not let all of the feelings, because it's so easy to take on the guilt and the shame and that self-punishing kind of narrative in your mind, and it can get away from you pretty quickly, those feelings. But when I slowed myself down and I started to ask myself these questions, like, what was my intention in that moment? When I answered that question, it was to give my son the food he was asking for, to give him the crayons and the paper that he loved because he loved to color, and to run back and check on Devin, but to be right back. That was my true intention. And when I slowed myself down and I really got clear about that morning and what I was doing that morning, I found the ability to do the one thing that has seemed absolutely impossible before that. And that was to have some grace and some compassion for myself, to see myself the way I would look at anyone else in that situation, and to allow myself to learn and to grow and to begin to heal by extending myself that little bit of kindness, which was to say, yeah, you were a good mom. You were a really good mom. And I love my son so much today. Nothing has changed from that morning to today. And I've learned that sometimes the hardest thing that we do is allow ourselves that little bit of grace that we seem to have for so many other people, for so many other circumstances, and apply it to myself, and to give myself this opportunity to be more than just that one moment, to look at myself more completely and not become so focused on a moment that definitely changed and altered my life. There's nothing that I can do to go back and reverse this. So what will it mean going forward? And I had to begin with allowing myself to not punish myself for something that was truly an accident. And I think that for so many people, that's such a hard thing for them to do, is to allow themselves to remember that this life will have loss. There's not a single one of us that will get through this life experience without going through hard and difficult and painful things. So how we do that matters. How we support people that are going through a loss, like losing a child, it is important. It is important to give them the time and the space they need, but also to see them clearly, to really see them and to be present with them. It's not about what we say, it's about the proximity that we keep. If we are out of reach and out of sight, it is an isolation. It feels like a second wave of loss, you know? And so I always try to encourage people not to be afraid of the bereaved or the grieving, but to lean into being present with them. It can be awkward, and people think that they have to have the right things to say, and it's not about that. It's not about what we say. There aren't words that would have taken away the hurt, but there were friends that were truly present with me. And sometimes it was, they were there and they had fresh strawberries one morning. I have a very vivid memory of a friend that brought fresh strawberries and this diced angel food cake. And she just sat with me with a bowl of fresh strawberries, angel food cake, and some whipped cream. And it was like, it was a beautiful moment. And there was nothing said. We were just sharing this moment together. And I just remember being really present and thinking how immensely blessed I was to have a friend that was willing to sit in silence with me and not try to pretend like they had answers or this magical cure for what I was feeling, but that they were there, that they were there.
I love that. So many times people say they don't know what to do to help someone who's dealing with any kind of loss. And so many times I know with me, if somebody would just be with me, we didn't have to talk about anything, you know, we could go on a walk or just sit and enjoy the weather outside or whatever. I think it's the doing. Everybody's trying to do something, and you don't necessarily have to do something. Just show up in some way.
Yeah, I think for me, and I think this is a very common phenomenon, it was about 2 weeks after the accident that life resumed. You know, everyone went back to work. All the relatives who came in went back home. My husband was back at work, and then it was me and Devin. And I will honestly say that is when the real courage began, because every day was the reminder that he wasn't there. I wasn't picking up Devin and Drew from kindergarten or preschool. I was just picking up Devin. And, you know, Devin was 3.5. And the questions, Mommy, when is Drew coming home? Where is Drew? How come Drew doesn't ever sleep in this room anymore? You know, all of those very innocent questions felt like emotional daggers. Like, honestly, I just used to think, I have no idea how I'm going to answer this question and not just absolutely emotionally unravel. So it was hard, you know, and I think that's the thing about a healing journey, is that I wish I could say that it's one that feels good. Like with there's some steps that feel really hard. They feel super scary. They feel like they might literally undo the very little bit that you've gotten to like pulled together. Like you feel like you're risking so much in the beginning, but it's in the doing where the trust that you learn to develop inside of yourself really becomes super important, because with each attempt, whether you deem it successful or not, the attempt establishes a new dynamic. It is about believing in yourself enough to continue on. And I started to pay attention to how often I felt a resistance to that. And it was all the time. Like, it felt so tempting to just avoid it all. And I knew that was going to put me in some really tricky places because there's no amount of avoiding pain that I've ever found resolves it. It's only in the moments where I've had the absolute courage, and I'm not even going to say it was like I was wanting to do it. I just knew that if I didn't, it would continue. And I wanted to find a way to learn and grow and not just avoid and kind of linger. That just wasn't for me the answer. And so I got really good about leaning into painful things. I got really good about spending enough time inside of these emotions where the more elevating questions would come. I stopped asking why, like, why did this happen? There was no answer that was ever going to be given to me that would be satisfactory. To me, there was no reason why this should have happened. So what would I learn from this? What would it reveal to me about myself? Who could I become as a result of losing a child that maybe wouldn't be possible if I didn't? And I started to ask myself these questions that forced me to look beyond just the loss of my son and into who I could become and what that version might be capable of contributing. And that's when sharing my personal story became more than just this idea. It became a purpose. It became a call to serve that I didn't ever hear before or even desire before. And now it became this absolute desire. I desired to discover who this future woman that I could become could be. And I got super dedicated to leaning into uncomfortable things and not avoid hard stuff in order to answer that question. And I think 24 years later, I can honestly say that this is a version that I don't think I could have even fathomed. I think that my idea of who I could evolve to was so limited back then. And it's a commitment that I continue to embrace every single year. What can my life experiences lead to? What sort of service or contribution can circumstances that I would never have signed up for provide me? I would never want some of these experiences. I wish I could give them back. But knowing that I can't, what can I creatively design? What can I, with like a real intention, what can I access? And where can that lead? And that felt inspiring. And I began to feel those old, like that version of myself, that vibrant, happy version of myself. I felt that come back, but in a different way, in a very tangible way. It felt so solid. It felt almost foundational, like life would be built on this foundation. And thankfully, my life has given me many opportunities to ask that question. And I no longer see anything as an unfortunate thing. It may not be what I would have just, chosen for myself, but thank goodness there is gratitude, and thank goodness there are moments where we can let painful things give us the gifts that can be awaiting us. And I think for me, when I go all the way back to the beginning and that idea that I wanted to be more than okay, I'm so grateful for it. It didn't make sense to me at the time, but it's something that has absolutely served me well.
And I love that. I think that's one of the most important things for people when they're dealing with loss is they tend to feel lost. Like, what is it that I do now? What could I do now? What's possible? And by finding that purpose, like you found, that changes your whole life. That happened for me. And I realized that I had to figure out what my purpose was, just as you did. And once I did, and I started focusing that direction, it was an amazing experience. And I'm glad that I did that. So I've really enjoyed having Melissa here with me today. And her story is so powerful. I'm sure that you can take it to heart and learn much from what she has said. And I want to thank you, Melissa, for being here and doing this just wonderful service to these people. You're a shining example of being there. You can smile. A lot of people think they're never going to smile again, but you've been able to discover that smile and how to get on with your life and have the best life that you can have. So thank you for being here. I'm glad you came. I hope you will all read Melissa's book, Lessons from Neverland. You'll be amazed at the content of this book and how you'll feel by the time you finish reading. So thank you for joining us today, and I'll see you again next week. Do you want more comfort, support, and happiness? Join the Grief and Happiness Alliance. Visit my website at lovingandlivingyourwaythroughgrief.com and read my book, Loving and Living Your Way Through Grief. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast, rate it, review it, and binge on all our episodes on grief and happiness. I can't wait to welcome you back to another episode